"Stop! My father fainted!" The young girl's scream froze the bus instantly. The driver saw what was happening through the rearview mirror and made a decision. This was no longer an ordinary city route. Mike Anderson, 58 years old, was a quiet, calm man who drove a bus on one of Chicago's busiest routes. With his thin-framed glasses, always neatly pressed blue uniform, and voice that never rose, he was known to everyone. For years he had been working on the 151 route, starting his first shift at 5:30 a.m. and finishing his last run at 10 p.m. He stopped at the same stops, waited at the same traffic lights, barely greeting his passengers. Everyone knew him as Quiet Mike. Nobody knew that in his past he had been an ambulance driver who transported the most critical emergency cases to hospitals during Chicago's most turbulent times. Traffic accidents, terrorist incidents, fires, births, there was nothing he hadn't seen or experienced. Until one day, unable to cope with the internal trauma, he left the wheel. After working 72 hours non-stop during the 9/11 attacks, transporting hundreds of injured from ground zero to hospitals, one patient he couldn't save in time became the last straw. From that day on, he could never get back into an ambulance, nor could he tell anyone. Now he was just a bus driver. Silent, invisible, alone. That day, a Friday evening, traffic was paralyzed. It was 6:30 p.m. and everyone was in weekend rush. Mike was crawling along with his bus. The interior was packed. The smell of sweat, wet umbrellas, and the weight of fatigue filled the bus. People were on their phones, wearing headphones, staring out the windows. Nobody looked at each other. Everyone was in their own shell. Mike gripped the wheel tightly, focused on the brake lights of the cars ahead. This road from Lincoln Park to downtown had become his meditation. The same scenery, same streets, same faces every day. Just as they approached Michigan Avenue, a young girl's scream came from the back. "Stop! My father fainted!" Everything happened at once. The bus fell into deep silence. Those listening to music removed their headphones. Those on phones suddenly went quiet. All passengers' eyes turned to the elderly man who had fainted and the panicked girl beside him. The man, in his 70s, well-dressed and respectable-looking, had turned pale, sweat pouring down his forehead. His daughter, perhaps in her 20s, a college student, was shaking him frantically. "Dad! Dad! Please wake up!" Mike saw what was happening through the rearview mirror. Seeing that frightened young face, that unconscious man's condition, awakened instincts he had suppressed for 10 years. No ambulance siren was ringing, but an alarm was sounding inside him. His heart raced, his palms sweated. In that moment, he found himself back 10 years ago, behind the wheel of an ambulance. With a sudden decision, he turned on the hazard lights. He took the announcement microphone and his voice came out sharp and confident enough to freeze everyone on the bus. "Emergency! Medical attention required. This bus is now officially an emergency vehicle. Please remain calm and stay in your seats." "Is there anyone with first aid training?" Nobody could understand what was happening. This couldn't be the same quiet, meek Mike they knew. The authority in his voice, the decisiveness, left everyone stunned. He pulled the bus over to the side of the road, pulled the handbrake, and started walking toward the back. Passengers made a path for him. His steps were determined, his eyes focused. He reached the unconscious man, knelt down, put 2 fingers on the man's wrist, checked his pulse, then lightly lifted his eyelids and checked his pupils. "He's having a heart attack," he murmured to himself. Then he looked up and started barking orders to the passengers around him. "You, sir, in the blue shirt, please open the windows, let in some fresh air. Ma'am, you standing there, please call 911 and give them our exact location. 2 people, help me lay him down, elevate his feet." Without hesitation, he took off his jacket, folded it, and made a pillow under the man's head. He asked a passenger for bottled water, sprinkled it on the man's face and neck. "Does anyone have water, please?" Several passengers immediately handed over water bottles. All this took only a few minutes, but everyone on the bus felt as tired as if they'd been watching for an hour. Everyone was frozen, watching Mike. Finally, he took out his phone and called 911 directly. But this wasn't an ordinary call. Professional. Language, precise coordinates, the patient's condition, first aid performed. Dispatch, I'm on public transit vehicle Route 151, Michigan Avenue location, 100 yards from bus stop. Male, 70s, suspected heart attack, weak pulse, shallow breathing, basic life support administered, requires urgent medical attention. Where can we meet the ambulance? Just like in the old days. He told them exactly where they could meet the ambulance. When he hung up, the bus was still in deep silence. Everyone was looking at this man they didn't recognize. Just then, the elderly man's eyes opened. His breathing began to stabilize. With difficulty, he looked around. His daughter, in tears, grabbed Mike's hands. "God bless you, are you a doctor?" Mike smiled slightly. He got up from the floor and walked toward the front of the bus, to the driver's seat. As he walked, he answered over his shoulder. "No, sweetheart, I used to drive an ambulance for 20 years. That sentence changed everything on the bus. An audible gasp went through the interior. The shock in people's eyes was replaced with deep respect. A few passengers whispered, "Bravo, Mike." Another said, "Wow, who would have known?" 10 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. When the medical team entered, everything was ready. Mike briefly summarized the patient's condition. Male, 70s, sudden loss of consciousness, sweating, pallor. Pulse 45, irregular, oxygen saturation low, regained consciousness about 8 minutes ago. A young paramedic in the ambulance team looked at Mike in surprise. Are you medical personnel?" Mike shook his head. "I was, long time ago." The elderly man was placed on a stretcher and taken to the ambulance. Before getting into the ambulance, his daughter ran to Mike and hugged him tightly. "Can I get your name and number? When my father recovers, we'll definitely call." Mike smiled gently. "No need, sweetheart. What matters is your father's recovery. Get well soon." After the ambulance left, Mike returned to his bus. The silence inside was now a different silence. Passengers looked at him with respect and gratitude. He started the bus, turned off the hazards, and set off. From that moment on, everyone looked at him differently. The next day, local newspapers ran stories with headlines like, "Hero on the bus, former ambulance driver saves a life." The company congratulated Mike, even giving him a small certificate of appreciation. Passengers now smiled and greeted him. Every time they boarded, sometimes bringing chocolate, sometimes homemade cookies. But Mike himself hadn't changed at all. He was still the same quiet, humble man. Only now, he had shed some of the heavy burden he'd carried for 10 years. Now, when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw not just the road, but also the faces of his passengers. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking people hide the most extraordinary heroes within, and sometimes to save a life you don't need sirens and flashing lights. Just a heart that's in the right place and knows what to do is enough. Have you ever met someone like Mike? Someone who seemed ordinary but had an extraordinary past? Share your experiences in the comments. And if this story touched you, subscribe to help keep such stories alive.